This past weekend, I played in my first chess tournament since the Utah Open. There were so many people at this tournament that they actually had to break it down into two sections. So I was in the upper section, playing with somebody as high as 2100, me being a 1350 and quick, which are 15-minute by 5-second increment games. Didn't look good from the outset, but this is how I did. So my first game here, I start off as black playing against my opponent, who's around a 1700 rated player. He says his highest over the board rating was 1950 at one point, so he's a very good player. And we always have some fun games, but I usually play as black as I'm playing now. So he goes e4 and I go into the Karo Khan, and we go into the exchange variation, which I'm very comfortable with. And he went h3 here, so I decided to get my bishop out right away. Usually in this situation, I don't see many people play h3 because I like to get my bishop over here on g4. He goes knight to f3, I go knight to c6, he goes c3, knight to f6, just typical exchange ideas. We trade off the bishops, I get my Karo Khan structure, and we're out of the opening at this point. So we're coming into the middle game. I'm trying to figure out what the plan is from here, and the plan for me is going to be attacking on the queen side and getting these pawns kind of situated, because there's not really a concrete plan that I can do attacking onto the king side already. So I'm trying to get my knight over here on c4, and he is preventing that. And so I'm trying to maybe go here, attack the queen. There's not a lot of attacking ideas at this point, but there's not much to do. We're in a complete even game. He takes the bishops, we get the bishops off the board. He doubles the rooks up, and I say, okay, let's forget about this plan. It's not gonna happen. And he brings the queen over, so I bring the knights back. We're still completely even. It's a very even game. And then he decides to push c4 and strike in the center. I take with the b pawn, he takes back, and then I attack this rook here. He brings the rook to attack me there, and I defend with the knight. Obviously that comes back, we trade. And I take it with the knight because once I figured this pawn would push here, I would blockade with the knight and stop any advancement of the pawn, and which is exactly what I did. He brings knight to e5, which I was like, man, I don't really want to trade off the knights, but that's what's going to happen. I'm going to have to blockade with the queen, which isn't the best case scenario. And you can see that white now finally takes his first advantage of the game with a concrete plan. I bring my knight to trade off these rooks, and I get my queen out here trying to, one, create some counterplay, but two, just also create some sort of attack. It felt like I was on the defense the entire time. I go with the check here. He goes king to h2. I go h6 to prevent any back may, and he starts to double up on the b file here. So from here, I trade off the queens, which he thought wasn't the best move, but according to the engine, it was the best move. And then I want to trade off the rooks here, but he pushes his rook behind the c pawn here, and I go on the attack, trying to get this pawn. He just pushes up. I have to bring the knight back, and I'm going to blockade here. After the king comes here, it stops any possibility of this. I try to get my king there, see if I can get anything going. We're in a completely even position. I say, hey, I'll trade off the rook here, because if he takes, I take, and then I'm covering the promotion square. He drops the rook back. I attack the knight. The knight comes in for check. I bring here. So at this point, there's 30 seconds left on the clock, and I had to stop taking notation. What ended up happening was he ended up getting more pieces in the game. This a pawn came up to attack this rook, so I had to drop this rook back. And what happened was, after a while, I got the knight and the rook forked, so I had to lose one. They ended up being able to promote that pawn and winning the game. But the cool thing about this game is when you look at it from this point, and you look at the game review from here, he played with a 90% accuracy and I played with 89% accuracy. It's a very close game basically the whole time. So I'm pretty proud of how I played against the 1700 rated player. And you can't really play much better than that, especially like in an opening middle game and then close to an end game. I pretty much played as well as I could play. So I was very happy with that game. So in my second game here, I played against actually my easiest opponent of the day, which was a 1250 rated player. And I played as white, so I go e4, trying to go into my Italian style game. I saw he goes with the Karo Khan, so I usually always go with the King's Indian attack. It takes any Karo Khan player out of their prep and makes it so I'm not playing to their advantage. So he goes to fianchetto the bishop. And I figure I'm going to take up space as much as possible. And he shuts down. And we're kind of in like an advanced French at this point. So we trade off the d pawns here and get the typical advanced French structure. And I go to protect the center as much as possible and lock this down. He still hasn't fianchettoed this bishop. He gets this knight out, which pretty normal. I bring this bishop out. I'm looking to trade it at some point. And the bishop comes out here attacking my king. I say, like, great, let's just trade off these bishops. He gets his bishop out, and then I trade off this knight here, thinking, hey, let's mess up the structure and then start to attack this king side if he does castle that direction. At this point, once this structure is made, I'm going to attack this bishop. I'm going to see if I can get this bishop off the board. And after he attacks here, I go knight takes d7, fulfilling my idea of taking the bishop. However, that was a mistake. What I should have done instead was I should have gone here, knight to b7. The reason being, after queen to e7 here, I now have this really strong output post on the knight, and the king can no longer castle, completely shutting down everything for him, and things are not looking good at this point. So that is the plan I should have done. Instead, I took on knight to d7 here. After the queen takes me trade off, I castle, and he castles long. I think his pawn structure is really bad, and I got a slight advantage because of that. And so I just went ahead and started attacking on the king side, doubling up the rooks. His knight gets out of the way, and I don't really want to trade off right away because all we're doing is trading off the rooks. And I couldn't see a direct plan of attack on attacking his queen. So he started to attack on this open file, and I thought that that's probably a pretty decent threat. So I threw up the knight here, looking to snag one of these two pawns. And after trading, he brings the rook over to protect one of these two. And I bring the knight back because I want to get my queen over here and start attacking there. So after he pushes up here, I bring the queen over to attack the rook. The rook comes down to attack, and I snag this extra pawn. The only problem is it's hard to get my queen back in the game, which was a problem later on, because as he gets the knight back in, I attack the rook, and he brings here. Now, I'm just thinking, what do I have to do to attack this rook? Things are looking really good for me. And so I blunder by going h3 here, dropping the d4 pawn. He finds it, and I just go and attack, and I'm getting kind of bullied at this point, right? So I trade off the rook. I'm now blockading the pawn with my knight yet again in the second straight game. I'm trying to get my queen back in the game. I'm threatening the knight there and just trying to get my pieces back. Queen to d5. It's still a slight advantage for me. I go f4, and at this point, the arbiter comes over to us and says, your opponent has flagged. And so luckily for me, I win the second game. We don't even have to play it at all. I had about 7.5 minutes left on the clock. He was completely at 0. I was so enthralled that I didn't even realize that he was low on time. And so I win the second game of the tournament. So in my third game of this tournament, I'm playing against about a 1600, 1650 rated player. He's playing as white, I'm playing as black, and he goes e4, and I go into my Caro-Kann prep. And he goes into this weird line of knight to f3. I don't see it very often, so I go, he attacks. And I've played against this before online in blitz games, and I know it's a very trappy line. And you can get into some really big issues if you don't know what you're doing. However, I decided I'm just going to play solid. Try not to let him get any good counterplay moves. I was thinking long and hard about what my first couple moves would be. And I decided I'm just going to go ahead and develop my pieces as quick as possible. So after going bishop to c4 here, I just shut this down. I have the typical pawn structure in the Caro-Kann, which is very solid. I'm developing nicely. I'm very happy with where I'm at. I'm castled. Things are looking great. He goes to attack. We just trade off there. I drop the bishop, and he solidifies his pawn structure in the center. And apparently dropping the bishop back here was a big mistake. The reason being, instead of dropping the bishop back, if I go queen to h2 here, king takes on h2, I then have queen to h4 check. And then I can take this knight here, and I'm up a pawn, and things are dandy. I have a good attack going. However, I didn't do that. What happens instead is white plays c3, strengthens up his center. I have now a slight advantage, not nearly as big as it would have been if I found that move. And I continue to develop my pieces. I want to get my knight out here over on f6, possibly, and exchange that with the queen. But after bishop over here to h5, supported by the knight, that's not going to happen anymore. So I drop the queen over here to c8. Knight comes over to g3. I drop this bishop back. And now the queen's coming out and lining up with the bishop, which can be potentially dangerous if I try to create an escape skirt for my queen. I offer a bishop trade. He says, no, I don't want to. I then try to attack his bishop here. He drops the bishop back. And then I bring this very strong knight to the center of the board. He doesn't want that, so we trade off. So now he's trying to get his knight back in the game. And I'm offering the bishop trade again. And he just pulls back, which I thought was very interesting, because you're just taking back with a knight, and this with the bishop here, it's hard for the knight to really do anything. So you're gonna end up coming back with the knight anyways. Engine has this completely at an even valuation. This whole tournament, I felt like I was at an even evaluation. It was hard to find the right move to win the game. So I get queen to c7, trying to create some lines for my queen. I'm thinking also to get over here to b6, back his pawn potentially. And he pushes to h4, and I just bring this back to get my bishop in the game, because I realize once he goes to h5, this square is still taken by the knight, and the bishop is looking at all these squares that the knight can't move, so it's going to end up having to come back to one of these two squares anyways. Plus, I still have this whole I side of the board. It's a strong bishop. So rook to e5 here, trying to get his rooks in the game. I decided to push with my pawns, create a little bit of a minority attack, because I don't exactly know what he's going to be doing here. I think that my pieces are pretty well coordinated for the most part. So he's trying to get his knight in the game. I push b4, trying to break up some sort of this pawn structure, open up some lines for my rooks. He brings this rook over here to e3, so that when I do take, I was thinking that he would take with the rook, be very strong. I bring the queen over and trade off some rooks there, but that didn't happen. He took with the pawn. So I say, hey, let's bring these rooks to the game. And now he's threatening this here with the queen takes on h6 move here, which you see right away, and I go f8. And then he's now looking here for the pin to take here on e6. So I bring my queen over here to protect this and now control all three of these lines. What I should have done instead is I should have gone bishop to e4 here, attacking this knight so that if the rook does take here, I just take back. And you also have a very strong bishop now restricting a lot of the movement of these pieces. This rook has nowhere to go but to die. After rook to f4, you get the king out. The knight comes out, you bring the bishop back, rook to f3. And now I'm controlling these files. Knight to f1, and then the rook's here. And black is just much better at this point. So instead, I didn't do that. I bring the queen out here to b6. He brings the queen out here to e3. Rook to c6. I'm now trying to just defend this pawn. And now the queen's here, threatening mate here. And so what I do is I bring this pawn here to one threaten this. I'm covering this. He doesn't have any places to really go as a rook. So he brings it back. And I double up looking to attack this pawn here. And he brings the knight. I bring the queen to one attack this, but also possibly attack here. But the only issue I had with attacking there is the queen check here. I didn't see, there was no escape from my king since his pawn is here. So after the knight moves here, I thought about taking this, but because of that queen trade, I didn't like it at all. So I took the pawn instead, trying to attack the knight, kind of forgetting that he can just take this outpost here. So then I'm moving this rook over here to e8 just to defend this pawn. He attacks there, and I blunder with queen takes c4 here, taking my queen out of the game. For the most part, I have to spend a move to get back in, and things aren't looking great. What I should have done instead is queen to b1 check, and then after king to h2, queen to f5, offering the queen trade, and I'm just better off at that point. So after going queen to c4 and blundering, he now has the 2-point advantage. Knight to d7, throwing me in check. I just moved back, and now he pushes here, knight to e5, attacking both the queen and the rook. I just get out of that simply by putting him in check and then bringing the rook over here. I'm still in a lot of trouble because after knight to d7, I bring this bishop here, trying to block any of this attack. I think it would have been better here with the rook attacking here. I didn't feel like too much. I couldn't really attack too much. I thought that I was pretty cramped, but at this point was out of time. I had about 30 seconds on the clock, so I stopped taking notation again. I ended up dropping that game, not a big deal, and we go on to the next game. So my fourth game, I played black for the third time today. I'm playing against a opponent that I've played multiple times in the past. He's about a 15-50, and I feel like I have a good shot of winning this game if I play well. And he goes with knight to f3, and immediately is like, oh, I want to play e4, and I was like, you can take that back, and he's like, no, it's fine. And since I knew he wanted to play e4, I just say, hey, let's play a Caro-Kann. He's like, well, if you're gonna give me e4, and I was like, great, let's play the Caro-Kann. And so luckily for me, it worked out that way. It could have been real bad if he didn't play e4. I got very lucky there. And so he goes with the two knights attack. I always go with bishop to g4 here, attacking the knight here on f3. He attacks, and the reason being because once you take here and the queen takes, you just create this pawn structure here, and you kind of have like a semi-Slav. Pretty hard for white to break in. So after he pushes to e5, get the knight over here to e7, pushes d4, and now we're kind of in like an advanced structure. And after the bishop, we get the knight there. Trade off the bishop. This knight's now attacking here. Queen comes to defend it. Also attack here, so it stops my bishop from going over here, taking on c5. Bring my queen to a5 to attack that pawn. He castles, and I get the pawn. So we're about even now. I have a slight advantage just because my structure is, I think, superior. He goes rook to e1, and I go to g6 looking to fianchetto this bishop. It doesn't seem like there's any way for me to really get it out. I could go here and here, but it takes too long, I think. He brings the king over here to h2 for safety. I bring the bishop to g7, and then he locks down that center with f4, which is the reason for that king to h2 move. Didn't realize that in the game. And now that this center is kind of locked down, this bishop is very, very terrible. I castle. He pushes to a3. I bring my knight over here to e7, looking to attack the queen over here on g3. And after the bishop comes to attack the queen here, I just drop it back to c7. What I should have done instead is instead of going to c7, I should have gone queen to c4, putting the pressure on this bishop so that I can get some more pieces in the game. I can get here. It's just a much more like open, basic position for me. Instead, I went back to c7 here. And after the queen got out here, I bring the knight there. He attacks my queen. I just brought it back up to c6. He attacks my knight, and I drop the knight back. So then he's looking to attack my bishop. I go rook from f to e8, defending it. No problem whatsoever. Completely even game. He brings the rook over here, and for some reason in my head, I did this. I did this in my brain. But what I did is I moved the other rook instead, dropping my knight. You can see now that the engine has me down 5, and it was pretty hard for me to come back at this point. I mean, it's super unfortunate that I played so well this whole tournament, and then I had one blunder like this that really just kind of screwed me. The queen gets in, and there's not really much counterplay for me to really go off of. And so I get to this point, no more notation is to be had. I run it out of time. We end up getting into a rook endgame. I'm able to be as resourceful as possible, but in the end, he just had too many pawns for what I had, and I ended up losing this game. So I finished this tournament at 1 of 4, probably one of my weakest tournaments, but I was also the lowest rated person in this tournament, so I'm pretty happy with the results. So I'm gonna have one more tournament next week. That video will be here, and then after that, we're playing in Las Vegas in the North American Open. I can't wait to see you guys then, and you have a beautiful day. Goodbye.